Here's your smart fact of the day. Haven't you heard of people saying, "Have you read The Room?" And reading The Room leads you to reading subtext. Now, what is subtext? Subtext can be defined as an underlying meaning that is implied but not directly stated. So, examples of subtext can include sarcasm, humor, flirting, etc. etc. Welcome to Smarter with Sid, and in this episode of Smarter with Sid, what we are going to do is understand on how we can read a room by reading the subtext that is happening within the room. Let's go. I must confess, the need for reading subtext happens when you transition to a new place or a new situation or new things. In my case, I've just gone to a place where I'm teaching in the UK from teaching in India. So that means that the culture is different. That means that rooms are different. That means students are different, colleagues are different, the rest of it. I'm not saying good or bad, mind you, just different, which essentially leads to you perhaps sometimes misunderstanding things if you read the room the same way that you were reading in the earlier context. Now, this happens to us much more often than we actually believe. A lot of times, what we are doing is that we are entering a room and just responding to the direct text in quotes that I'm talking about, right? So we are just responding to what is being said and we are looking at it verbatim and we are responding to it as if, that is without the context that it lies in. And this becomes very frustrating for people who are linear, logical, and rational minded, which includes a lot of us, and in fact, the majority of us. So the context for today's episode of reading a room or reading subtext within a room is based out of that. It is based out of the fact that a lot of us read a room wrong because we don't read the subtext. Now, just to complete this context, I just wanted to tell you where I got the inspiration to make an episode for this. And this was after seeing Quentin Tarantino films. Oh, trust me, I'm going to connect the dots over here. So Quentin Tarantino is a really interesting filmmaker, and I went on a binge of watching all of his films of late. So Inglourious Bastards and, Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and so on and so forth. And one of the things he does really, really well is that he is able to hold your attention, create tension and create humor and create warmth based on making the room, or rather the scene in this case, pregnant with meaning. And that meaning is not only about the dialogue between the characters or the action that's happening in terms of, killing somebody or whatever, because there's a lot of violence there. It is also in the pregnant pauses. It's also in the way in which the room is set up. It's also in the lighting. It's also in the intonations. It's also in the, so many undefinable things. But as a viewer, you can immediately appreciate the tension because you can feel it in your gut. You can feel it in your bones. And that's the beauty of director like Tarantino, that he actually recognizes the subtext and its importance as connected to the text. And even when you're setting up a room, this wonderful famous scene between Christopher Waltz and the Jewish person who's run away, and they're meeting in a restaurant, and she's a woman and he is like in a position of power, and just the way in which that whole thing is set up, it comes across as, oh my God, it is intimidation without you really understanding it. I'm talking of a scene from Inglourious Bastards. If you haven't seen the film and the scene, please do see it. But the subtext makes the scene rather than what is being spoken. In fact, what is being spoken of is extremely mundane and dull, right? So this kind of completes the context in which what I want to talk about is the importance of subtext. Now, the next time when you enter into a meeting, or the next time you enter a room, or the next time you enter a Zoom meeting, or sometimes, a lot of these interactions are over mail, I think it's incredibly important for all of us to be alive to the fact that I'm not only going to respond to the direct things out here, but I'm also going to respond to the indirect things. So the first principle of actually reading a room is to be aware that there is a room, and it is not as if you're going to respond the exact same way that you have responded to the earlier mail or to the earlier meeting, the way in which you were, or the rest of it. Every text has a room, every text has a subtext, every text has a context. And as people who are trying to improve the way in which we are trying to communicate, especially in a work setting, especially in a client agency sort of setup, or even a boss, peer, colleague, whatever you want to call it, there is always a context. And some contexts are easy to read. Like, for example, if you're going to go out with your colleagues for a work related picnic or party, everyone lets their hair down and it's very easy to read the subtext over there. But can we read, the subtext within a meeting? Some of us are really good in that because we come primed to see that, to observe that even before we understand what is being spoken about in the meeting. And that's what it means as to be present in a room. And I've seen so many of us, right, in all of my different avatars in my career, like whether I was an entrepreneur or whether I was a corporate guy or an academician. I've seen that we always are coming across these colleagues, and sometimes we are one of them, who have come into the room, but they are just not reading the room. They might be physically present, they might be reacting to all the things that are being said, but they don't understand the underlying feeling. So, first of all, be aware. I think that's principle number one. Principle number two is, now that you're aware, try and gauge the subtext or the dominant emotion in the room by seeing how you're feeling. Now, here is where you might think, oh, this is a bit woo-woo, but haven't you gone into a room wherein you're actually feeling a set of emotions which can be described as tense, and you can feel the tension? And I think it's important for us to decode the tension without either reacting to it or ignoring it, because those are the two sort of things that we do, right? We either react to it, we get sucked into the whole reaction business of the tension of the room, and we don't even know why we are reacting the way we do, or we ignore it, we don't recognize it, we don't recognize the subtext, and we just wade in and respond to the same, taking it at its face value, isn't it? So let's try to decode the subtext and then respond to it. And for all those of you who think that, okay, maybe I can do it, in a real meeting, but I can't for the life of me understand it through mails or on chat or something, just try to understand the difference between a full stop at the end of a yes and a yes without a full stop in a text. And you'll know what I'm saying. That full stop suddenly gives the yes or the sure a different meaning. Even, in fact, a sure instead of a yes is a different meaning. And that meaning itself may not be the same. So here's where it gets confusing, but you need to be able to read what the difference is between a sure to whatever you're suggesting to a yes or to a thumbs up. And all of them actually have different connotations. As soon as we understand all these different connotations and what they mean, it is very critical for us not to be reactive, even though we read what the real language is, what is being really communicated. It's important for us not to be reactive, but to be responsive to both the text and the subtext. Recognize the subtext, recognize the emotion, but respond only to the text. Don't respond to the subtext. Don't say, oh, I can see that you're feeling insecure. No. That's not the way, even though the feeling might be of insecurity from the other person. It is important to recognize it without actually calling it out. I think that's the third principle. If you follow these three, be aware, understand the subtext, and respond to both subtext and text without calling it out, I think you'll go a long way in reading the room and doing better for yourself. I hope you like this episode of Smarter with Sid. Many more to come from where this one came from. And hey, if you like episodes and my podcast, do like and subscribe to the podcast. And I'm the traveling professor on LinkedIn and on Instagram. No subtext there. And of course, if you like stuff like this, do connect and see what all IVM's got in store for you on the Happy Note.